Now that we have seen a little bit about presentational and container components, let's go ahead and reorganize our React application so that we will implement the menu component as a pure presentational component, and the dish detail component is already a pure presentational component, and we will lift all state information into a container component, which we will implement in the exercise. As you work on your project, make sure that yarn start or npm start that you executed in the very first exercise keeps running continuously. So you can see that my yarn start is running continuously in my terminal here, and then it'll recompile whenever I make any changes to my application. And so you can look at what is being printed in the terminal or the command window in order to get an idea. If there are any errors, they will be reflected here. Now in this case, as you can notice, it says that the logo is defined but never used in the app.js file. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that from my app.js file and clean it up a little bit. And anytime you change your code in your application, it'll be recompiled automatically because the yarn start is running, and it is running the compiler behind the scenes, keeping a watch on the files, and then recompile the files whenever any changes are made, and then start serving up the updated versions from the built-in server that is running from the Create React app script that we have installed earlier. Going to our application. In the application, in app.js, I'm just going to first remove this logo from there, and also I will delete this logo SVG file from there because I don't need that anymore. So I will remove that also from my application. Furthermore, going into the components folder, I'm creating a new file here called main component.js. So this would be acting as a pseudo container component for my application. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move much of the work from app.js into the main component.js. So I'm just going to copy the code from app.js and move into the main component.js and then paste it in here, because my main component's structure would be very much similar to the app component, and whatever the app component was doing earlier, much of that work, I will move it into the main component. So here, I'm not going to be using any styles for this main component because it is not doing any rendering of the views, so I don't need any styles here. It is simply making use of the views that are exported by the various components that we already have. And similarly, I will go into the menu component, and then this dish detail component that I was using in the menu component, I'm going to cut that and then move it into the main component. So the main component becomes responsible for both the menu and the dish detail, and it'll do all the rendering on our behalf. With these changes, let's go ahead and rename this as main component. So class main extends main component, and the state is stored right there. And within the render function, I'm going to first render the nav bar as we saw here, and then we'll render the menu, and also we'll render the dish detail component also right below here, and then I will pass it the dish information right here. Now, to pass the selected dish information, obviously I need to know the selected dish in the main component. So going to the state, I'm going to introduce a new variable here called selected dish, or new property called selected dish, and then I will assign that to null here. And so as you notice, the selected dish, I'm going to move that into the main component from the menu component. So in the menu component, I can now remove this selected dish completely. And then this on dish select also, I'm going to cut from the menu component and move it into the main component here. So that the main component is responsible for everything related to the state of my application. So the selected dish will also be tracked by the main component, and that is going to be supplied to my dish detail component from here. So once we have done these updates, then you notice that in the menu component, I still need to respond to the onClick method. So to help me to do that, from the main component, I'm going to pass in the onDishSelect to the menu component. So for the menu component, I'm going to come in here and then I will say onClick. So this onClick prop, I'm going to pass in from the menu component here. So we'll say menu component onClick. And within the onClick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the menu component. I'm going to remove this whole thing from there. We'll fix the menu component a little bit later, and then I'm going to come and paste that into the onClick method here. And what I would expect for the onClick method to just obtain the dish ID. I don't need the entire dish information because that is already there in the dishes here. So I can easily grab the information about the dish from there. So what I'm going to track is only the dish ID for the in the state of the menu component, the dish ID of the selected dish. So I will pass in the dish ID as the parameter to the onClick method here. So with this change, what I have done is I have passed in the onClick as a property to the menu component, and also this onClick, when it is invoked, will pass the dish ID parameter, which will come in as the parameter here for the onDishSelect. And then I'll say this set state dish ID. So the selected dish property here is only tracking the dish ID, not the entire dish information as we did in the menu component earlier. So we are only going to track the dish ID, not the entire dish. Now that also means that when I pass the dish information to the dish detail component, I need to go into this dishes array and then select out the specific dish information and then pass that to the dish detail component. So to do that, we'll just make use of the array operators in JavaScript to enable us to extract the details of the selected dish here. So for the dish detail that I am invoking here for the dish detail component, I'm going to pass in the dish as this state dishes. So from this dishes array, I'm going to select out one dish. That one particular dish is the one for which the dish ID matches the selected dish here. So how do we do that? From your knowledge of JavaScript, you can simply say this state dishes, and inside here I'm going to supply the arrow function here. So again, you see me using the ES6 arrow function here. So I'll say dish ID. So this dish is the parameter. So when I do this state dishes, and then for the dishes, I apply the filter option here. So this state dishes filter. And when I apply the filter, this filter will operate on each dish in the dishes array. So I will get access to each dish. For each dish, what I'm going to do is to check dish ID. Is this the same as this state selected dish? Okay, so this arrow function, what it does is it helps me to select out all those dishes for which the dish ID matches the selected dish, which contains the dish ID of the selected dish. So I will compare the dish ID of each dish with that and then extract that out. So this filter function, if you recall from your knowledge of JavaScript, this filter function will give the subarray of the dishes for which the subarray contains, or rather the constrained part of the array, or just the elements from that array for which this property, the dish ID, matches the selected dish. Obviously, you will get only one dish because the dish ID is unique for each dish, but the filter function will supply that as an array. So I will have to select the first item from this array there. So that's why I'll say 0. So index 0, the item in index 0, although you have to remember that there will be only one item in this array, but still we need to supply that one item. So by doing this, what we are ending up doing is selecting the specific dish, which is the selected dish, and then passing the dish information to the dish detail component here. So with this change, I am passing in whatever I need to do to the dish detail component in its props as dish, and the menu component is also set up appropriately. Now the dish detail component, you have already implemented that as part of your first assignment, so it should be working correctly when the dish is passed in as the props to it. And one more minor change here: when you import, recall that the main component is already in the components folder, so I don't need that part, and also for the dish detail component as such. And also one more minor change: we need to import the dishes from /shared.dishes, because this is in the shared folder, which is in the source folder. So you go up one level and into the shared dishes folder. And of course, one minor error that you would notice is that this is the main class in the main component. So I should be exporting the main class from the main component, not the app class. So with this update, now my main component is all ready to act as the container for my application. Now this main component is going to be used within the app component. So we'll go back to the app component, and then I'm going to remove all these from the app component. And so we'll just import main from the main component. And then I no longer need dishes in the app component because that is not required. And also I am not storing any state in the app component, so I can simply remove the constructor completely, and the app component itself receives no props. After these changes, now this navbar has been moved into the main component, so I can remove that completely, and this is just the main component rendered inside a div here. With this change, my app component is now ready to simply make use of the main component and then render the main component and then return that to index.js file. Now we need to go and complete the update of the menu component. So going to the menu component, recall that the main component is passing in this onClick as part of the props to the menu component. So noting that, going into the menu component, realize that those props are coming into the menu component itself. So within the menu component, when the card is clicked in the onClick, so this particular line in the onClick, when that card is clicked, I will say an arrow function and say this props on click, and this on click itself takes one parameter, which is the dish ID. So the particular dish that is being rendered, that dish's ID, I will pass this back to the onClick method that has been sent to me from the main component. And when you go to the main component, you realize that the onClick method is implemented to use the dish ID as the parameter, which is then supplied to the this on dish select as the parameter here. And one final change in the menu component. Now, since the menu component no longer uses the dish detail component, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove this dish detail component completely from the menu component. So with these updates, now my main menu component is also updated. The main component is also updated, and the app.js is also updated. Now, one minor change that you can make to your dish detail component. Recall that in your dish detail component, when you were rendering the date, you were simply rendering the date as an ISO string there. Now, I will give you some small snippet of code which will turn that ISO string into an actual date that can be displayed in a format that is more easily readable. So going to the dish detail component, I'm not going to show you how I implemented my dish detail component. I'm going to hide all that part here. We'll just go into this comment.date here, and this comment.date here, instead of simply rendering the comment.date as a string here, I'm going to use a international date format that JavaScript supports, and then update this. So we'll update this as new until this is part of JavaScript itself. So new until date time format, and then we will this date time format takes as the first parameter the format of the date that you want to display. So I'm going to use the US style of formatting the date. So I'll say EN US. You can supply your own local formatting for the date if you want here. So this is how the date time format function works here. So the date time format function, as you can see, new locales, which is a string, and then further options here. So the second part is the options, how you want to render the date itself. So for the format for the date itself, I will say year numeric, month, I will render the month as short, meaning that the month will be either Jan, Feb, Mar, and so on. So first three letters of that, and then the day would be rendered as 2-digit. Again, if you look up the documentation for the Intel date time format, a link to which I have provided in the additional resources, you will see why this formatting works very well to print the date. So this is the format that I'm going to apply to my date string that I have here. So this will take the date in the ISO format, and then this particular thing I'm going to apply to the comment.date here. And within the format, what I need to supply is convert this to a new date, and then say date parse comment.date here. Closing. So one more to close this parenthesis, and so that's it. So with this change, your date in your dish detail will be printed out as a, say for example, March 3rd, 1997, and so on. So in that format. So again, this whole string that I am applying here, I have supplied that in the instructions. So just go ahead and take a look at that string that I've supplied, and then you'll be able to notice what I have done to this. So this minor change or update to dish detail component. So going into, let me apply the container class to the dish detail component, and then save the changes and go and take a look at the browser. Going to the browser, let me click on a dish, and then you now notice that once you applied the container class in your dish detail component, it is being correctly rendered, aligned properly with the rest of your view in the browser. Again, click on another dish, and then you can see the details of the dish. Also notice how the date is now being rendered because of that minor change that we did in the dish detail component. So that's the change that we make to the way the date is rendered in the comments. With this, we complete this exercise. In this exercise, we have seen how we can divide our application into different kinds of components. So we used presentational components and also container components. With this, we complete this exercise. This is a good time for you to do a git commit with the message presentational and container components.